found former Blue Bulls flanker Joseph Ntshongwana guilty of 4 charges of murder.
The court has also convicted him of 2 attempted murder charges, assault, rape and kidnapping.
Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me here again today. Last week we spoke about the Kranskorp killer, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it up here for you. And this case was about a man who stalked and lured women to their demise in the Kranskorp area in KwaZulu-Natal. But for today's case, we are taking a look back at the Profiler Diaries book, and if you haven't seen the previous video on that, I'll also link it up here. But for today's case specifically, we are looking at the Brighton Beach Axe Murderer, and this case talks about a man who, in the span of 8 days in 2011, murdered 4 people, attempted to murder 2 more people, and to make matters even worse, threw in kidnapping and rape as well. And even though this case is incredibly horrific and incredibly gruesome, especially for the short period of time that he went on his massive spree, this serial killer is kind of unusual because he had a very specific MO in the beginning of when we pick up the story. However, in the beginning of his crime spree, he was doing very random things, and it didn't really link up with his killing spree until someone actually came forward, and then they were able to link it to him. So without me going on for too long, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
So this case was led by Lieutenant Colonel Jason Mcgray, and it mostly took place in 2011, but we will also be looking at cases that took place earlier, but only later on in the story. So the first man to fall victim of the axe murderer, which took place in 2011, was a man named Tembonkosi Tabakulu, and Tembonkosi was in Mpangeni on the 20th of March 2011, and he was here because he was attending his brother's funeral. But while Tembonkosi was at his brother's funeral, he got a call from his employer, and his boss asked him to come in the next day for work because he really needed him and he was short-staffed. And after a lot of back and forth on the phone, Tembonkosi eventually agreed, and Tembonkosi was like, sure, no problem, I will be there. So soon after he got off the phone with his employer, he then called his girlfriend, who he lived back in Durban with, and his girlfriend's name is Mabel Dlamini, and they stayed together, like I said, in Durban. And then he then called her and said that he's now going to come home earlier than he expected. So Tembonkosi then starts traveling back to Durban, and he then stops at a garage shop quite close to where he lived. And this is at around 9:15 in the evening. So he gets to this garage and he then picks up the phone and he calls his girlfriend Mabel again. And Tembonkosi then asks Mabel if she wants anything from the garage, if he must bring anything home. And Mabel just said, no, we don't need anything, just bring home some bread. So the garage was located in an area called Mcgray, and this is where Tembonkosi stopped to get the bread. So that was the last thing that Mabel had heard from Tembonkosi. They then said their goodbyes, and she expected him home quite soon because, like I said, the garage was quite close. But then at about 20 to 10, so 9:40, a man named Goldie was driving past, and he was driving past his garage and he sees 2 men, and he thought that they were fighting because the one man was on the pavement and the other guy was in the road, and they were kind of like pushing and shoving each other. And as Goldie is busy getting closer to these 2 men, he then saw that the man on the pavement who was pushing the other guy in the road was actually also holding an axe. So Goldie described the man on the pavement holding the axe as an incredibly muscular, tall and strong black man who was bald and wearing a navy blue or black tracksuit. But now Goldie was basically 10 meters away from the 2 men fighting, and he now sees the guy with an axe push the other man to the ground, and he starts now beating the man on the floor with this axe. So Gildred is now scared, and he then drives right past them. He drives to his home, which was a couple of blocks away. He then calls the police from his home, and then Gildred drives back to the scene. And when he gets there, the police are actually there now, and he then tells the police exactly what he saw earlier, and he was the man who called from this other location. But then, while Gildred had driven away, another man, a couple of minutes later, so around now 9:45, another man also witnessed the same scene. So Gildred was on this side of the road, and another man was on this side of the road, both experiencing the same thing from different angles. The other man on the other side of the road was named Peter Goldie, and he, like I said, witnessed it from the other side of the road. But by the time that he got closer to the scene of the men fighting, he had only witnessed the part where the man was already beating something on the ground. He couldn't really see what the man was beating. At first, he thought that it was actually a dog that this man was beating. But as Peter got closer, he noticed that it was actually a person. And then Peter got maybe 10 meters away as well. He then parked his car on the other side of the road. He got out and he started shouting at the man beating this man. And as he did, the man then looked at him and he then ran away. Peter Goldie then walked up to the man who was lying on the ground and he was met with an absolutely horrific sight. What he walked up to was a man who was now decapitated and there was blood everywhere. It was basically running out of his neck where he was wounded. But even though Peter was not able to see the perpetrator's face very clearly, he did also say that he was an incredibly tall, very strong, well-built black man who was also bald. But what was most important to the police at a later stage was that he described the perpetrator's car, which he said was a very small silver car that he got into and drove away with. And like I said, the crime scene was described as very traumatic to those who had seen it. And what I find quite sad when reading the description of this crime scene was that yes, there was a lot of blood, and yes, the man was horribly beaten to death or axed to death. But what I find also quite sad was near the blood and near the man's body was the loaf of bread that he was bringing home to his girlfriend Mabel. But speaking of Mabel, so 10 o'clock now came and Mabel was incredibly worried about her boyfriend because, like I said, the garage was only a couple of blocks from their house, so she didn't understand why it was taking over 45 minutes now for her boyfriend to come home. So Tembonkosi's girlfriend Mabel then started calling Tembonkosi's phone, and the phone's now ringing in his pocket at the crime scene, and a policewoman then picks up the phone. It was a lady named Warrant Officer Twala, and she picked up the phone. So Mabel's asking, why firstly is there a woman answering his phone? But she then describes herself as the police officer, and the police officer just said to Mabel that they were with Tembonkosi and they were going to bring him home soon. And Mabel just had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, and she started crying instantly, and she really just went cold. Basically, she knew that when a police officer answers your phone, it's never any good news. So Mabel actually stayed on the property, well, she and Tembonkosi stayed on the same property as Tembonkosi's employer. So remember, while Tembonkosi was in Empangeni at his brother's funeral, he got a call from his employer asking him to come and work. So that same employer was the person who Mabel and Tembonkosi's property they stayed on. So Tembonkosi's boss's name is Cornelius Bernard. And like I said, Mabel was incredibly in shock and she thought that something wasn't right. So she then went to Cornelius's home and she knocked on the door and she said, something is wrong with Tembonkosi, we need to go find him. So Cornelius and Mabel then get into Cornelius's bakkie and they then head to this garage in Montclair where Tembonkosi was apparently last heard from by Mabel. So as Cornelius and Mabel are busy driving towards this garage, they actually drive past the crime scene where Tembonkosi was just murdered. And as Mabel and Cornelius are driving past, Mabel is looking at this crime scene, but she can't see the body because the police and ambulance have just covered the body with that silver blanket. I think they used it in most emergencies. So they covered the body with a silver blanket so you couldn't see who was underneath. And Mabel then, after seeing this, turned to Cornelius and she said, I really think that is Tembonkosi. So Mabel and Cornelius then get to the garage. They asked the shopkeeper if they heard anything, and the shopkeeper said that he already left. So then Mabel and Cornelius get back in the car and they drive back to the home. And as they're doing that, they then look at the crime scene again. And as they get to the crime scene, the ambulance are now loading the body into the back of the ambulance. But the blanket comes off and Mabel then sees that it's Tembonkosi. She then runs out and she goes to this ambulance where she's now met with the absolute gruesome image of her boyfriend who's absolutely beaten, bruised and decapitated. And I can't have any more sympathy for the victims that we're going to talk about in this case, because this isn't the first victim's partner or girlfriend, wife, boyfriend who we're going to talk about in this case that had to witness firsthand what happened to their lovers and their partners. And to be frank, I can't think of anything worse than seeing your partner in that state. But sadly, there are more victims in this case, and the second victim to be murdered by the Brighton Beach Axe Murderer occurred on the 22nd of March 2011, and this happened at around 11:40 at night, so 20 to 12 in the evening. And this occurred only 2 days after Tembonkosi had been murdered. So a man named Temba Buthelezi was busy driving his vehicle home, like I said, at 20 to 12 at night. He was busy driving home and he came to a traffic circle. And as he got to the traffic circle, he was about to go left when he noticed on the right-hand side, in the middle of the traffic circle, was a man lying there. This traffic circle was in an area called Lamontville, and Tembo then stopped his car. He got out of his car and he walked over to the traffic circle, where he noticed that there was another decapitated body. Tembo then ran back to his car, he got his cell phone, and he immediately called the police. Police actually rushed to the scene. They got there quite quickly, and they noticed that this victim was decapitated, but his head was missing. The police also noticed that there were massive axe grooves in the ground where the perpetrator apparently missed hitting the victim. And just like Tembonkosi 2 days earlier, where the victim had been attacked mostly in his neck area, there was a lot of blood pouring from that area. So the first officer at the scene was Warrant Officer Zakile Mbambo, and he actually obviously looked at the body and he noticed what was happening, but he also then thought to himself, let me go and do basic police work and let's go knock door to door and see if anyone actually saw anything. And while Warrant Officer Mbambo was busy knocking door to door, he actually found the victim's wife. Sadly, the victim then identified her husband as Paulus Longwa, and he was 47 years old at the time that he was murdered. His wife said that he worked at a KFC quite close, and that's where he was actually coming from the night that he was murdered. He had just finished work. So while police were busy scoping the area, they actually did find Paulus's head, and it was also in a bin quite close to the body. And sadly, on the outside of the bin that Paulus's head was found in was an advert on the outside indicating to a KFC quite close by, which is where Paulus worked. So when we spoke about the quarry murders a couple of cases ago, I mentioned how difficult it was for South Africans to actually get a task team, specifically the police services. When they tried to get a task team together, the generals and the people higher up in the police force thought that it was quite unnecessary and quite money wasting. So when there was clearly a serial killer here, when police tried to get a task team together, it was also equally as difficult because police thought that it was quite wasteful and they didn't actually think that it was a serial killer because the cut marks were slightly different from person to person. However, Jason Mcgray, remember we spoke about him earlier as the person who led this task team, he kept arguing that of course it's the same person because how common is it that people quite soon after each other are dying from axe wounds to the neck and also in areas that are quite close to each other. So eventually Lieutenant Colonel Jason Mcgray was awarded his task team, and there were only about 4 people within this task team with him. And everyone in this task team then the next day on the 23rd of March 2011 went door to door asking anybody if they knew anything about Paulus's murder, even if they heard anything, seen anything, they must just come forward. They did actually manage to knock on the door of a lady who lived right on the edge of the circle, and her name was Nambuse Hadebe, and she was actually 8 months pregnant at the time. She did say to police that she did see something, and she said that she didn't come forward because she was scared. She just wanted to make sure that she was able to protect herself and her baby in case this person maybe was a vigilante and he was coming after anyone who said anything. So Nambuse said to police that on that night that Paulus was murdered, she heard people shouting. So when she looked out the window, she saw that there were 2 people fighting near the circle. And then all of a sudden she said that she saw one man busy hacking away at something at the circle because she didn't see the second man anymore. Nambuse then said that she saw the man who was busy hacking at something walk away and then come back a little bit later with a plastic bag. She then said that she saw the man put something heavy in the plastic bag because the bag dropped, and then she said that she saw him walk away again, and then he didn't come back for a couple of minutes. So she was like, okay, this is probably just something weird. And then she closed the curtains. Then, because it was so late at night, she noticed the running of a motor outside. So she then opens her curtains again, and she then sees this big man get out of a silver car and then pick up something again off the ground, put it in his car, and then drive off. When he came the second time with the car, she was able to get a better view of him because he now had his headlights on. And Nambuse described the man as a very tall, very muscular black man with a shaven head. Now, like I said, police came the very next day on the 23rd of March, and they were busy knocking around all the doors. And they had just finished at Nambuse's house and they were still busy looking around for any other evidence. And while police are now packing up because they're done for the day, they hear someone shouting and someone running towards them, kind of waving them down. And eventually the person gets to Jason Mcgray and the person says, you need to come quickly, another person has been attacked. But this time they survived. So this is basically what happened. And on the 22nd of March, so the day before and the same day that Paulus was murdered, Kangalani Felix Mduli was busy walking home at around 10:30 at night, when he's busy walking down quite a busy road, and he then notices a silver car pass him, stop, turn around, and come back. When the car came back, the car kind of went onto the pavement facing him with the headlights on, and he noticed that it was an Eastern Cape number plate of the silver vehicle. Kangalani then noticed a very well-built, muscular and tall man then get out of the vehicle. He said that this man then casually started talking to him, casually making conversation, like he kind of knew him. He said then all of a sudden this man then switched faces and basically he became incredibly aggressive and he started shouting at him and accusing him of sleeping with his daughter and giving his daughter HIV and AIDS. Kangalani then said that this man then all of a sudden pulled an axe out of this plastic bag that he was carrying, and he then tried to swing the axe at Kangalani, but luckily he managed to duck out of the way just in time and the man managed to miss. But then as he brought the axe back, he hit Kangalani in his right hand and also in his right rib cage. But luckily Kangalani was managed to run away and he was actually quicker than this big muscular man, even though he was incredibly injured, and he managed to kind of weave his way in between houses and hide away from his attacker. When police asked Kangalani to describe this man that he saw, like I said, he described him as a massive, big, muscular man who was incredibly tall, cleanly shaven on the head, and also he was described as a black male. But another piece of evidence that police got before was Kangalani now described this man as a left-handed person. Then, on the 23rd of March 2011, at around 3 o'clock in the morning, a man named Phindile Ntshongwana had just gone to bed and he heard a massive racket outside of his room, so he then went to the lounge to go and have a look what was happening. He then heard a man shout at the top of his voice, "Hi Bobuti," before a loud thump then ensued. As Phindile then opened the window, he saw this massive man running after a smaller man, and they were busy chasing each other in the dark. Phindile then described that the bigger man then caught up to the smaller man, grabbed him and pulled him to the ground before he then started beating him. Phindile could then see what this bigger man was hitting the smaller man with, and he said that he saw him then start hitting him to death with an axe. And he described the axe with a yellow handle. Phindile then called to his wife and he told his wife exactly what was happening. His wife then got out of bed and opened the bedroom window, hoping to scare this man away, but it never did. So Phindile then runs to the front door and he opens the front door, but he can't get out of the safety gate that's in front, and the keys weren't right where he could see them at the moment. So he kind of started to panic, and instead of trying to just find the keys to try and help this man on the floor, he then just shouted at this man who was busy attacking him, and he kept asking, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Stop it." And eventually the man looked up at Phindile. He then stopped what he was doing and he ran away, and Phindile described that he ran into a small silver vehicle. When police arrived, because Phindale's wife just called police, Phindile described the man as a tall, muscular black man who was wearing a navy tracksuit. He also said to police that if you ever need me to identify him, I have his face ingrained in my memory forever and I will never forget what I have just seen. Sadly, the third victim to be murdered by the Brighton Beach Axe Murderer, his name was Simon Mcgray, and because these attacks and these murders were now becoming incredibly often, like almost every day, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Mcgray then called Gerard Labuschagne, and I'm sorry for how I butchered his name in the first video, but he called Dr. Labuschagne and he said, "Please, we need your help. We need your team's expertise into try and find who this man could potentially be." Luckily for Jason Mcgray, Gerard was actually in Durban at the time, so he said to Jason, "Okay, cool, no problem. I'll meet you the next day at a coffee shop and we can then go through this entire case or just talk about what you need me to help you with." So eventually Jason, Gerard, and the entire task team, as well as Gerard's team, then came together and they basically made a profile of the serial killer, and they concluded that it was definitely a serial killer who loved to operate in his comfort zone. So he basically worked in areas that were very close to each other. Victims were all adult black males, and the serial killer always looked for men who were on their own, in the dark, or wherever opportunity arose where no one else was around. Then the next attempted murder by the Brighton Beach Axe Murderer was actually reported on the news before police even knew about it, and the news reported it to take place on the 23rd of March 2011, but the attempted murder actually took place 2 days earlier on the 21st of March 2011, and this took place in Umlazi in KwaZulu-Natal. And a man named Siyanda Emmanuel Kumalo, he was coming home from visiting his dad, and this was around 20 to 10 at night. And while he was busy walking down this road all by himself at night, he saw a silver vehicle drive past him, slow down, make a U-turn, and come back very slowly. The man in the car tried to flag Siyanda down, but Siyanda was having none of it. He knew that nothing good could happen in the middle of the night in a dark road all by himself. So he kept walking and walking, and then he heard someone get out of the vehicle. So as soon as Siyanda heard this, he booked it and he started running. And he kept running and kept running until he felt someone grab at his collar. And the person then pulled his collar and pulled him down to the ground. Siyanda and this man then fought while they were on the ground, and he then saw this massive man take out an axe from a plastic bag, and Siyanda was like, nope. So he tried to fight his way out, and he actually did. He got up and he started running away from this man. He then said that the man then threw the axe at him and it hit him in the back, but the axe didn't go deep enough and popped out of his back. But he just kept running with this massive wound in his back now, but he did manage to escape. So police did question Siyanda and they tried to get as much information as they could from him, but they kind of got the same description as they had gotten before, that he was a very tall, very muscular black man with a shaved head, and that he drove a silver vehicle. Now, while police and the task team were busy investigating the 2011 cases, a woman actually called and managed to get through to the task team to say that she has an open case that is incredibly similar to this case, and it involves her brother. And basically, her brother was busy taking a night stroll in a park that was very close to their home. He needed to clear his head, and sadly, he was attacked in this park by somebody. And the brother apparently, like I said, was walking in the park, and then all of a sudden he was hit at the back of the head with a baton, and he kept getting hit and hit until he was kind of dozing in and out of consciousness, but he did wake up to someone hitting him constantly with an axe. And this commotion, as soon as he woke up, he did scream, and it woke up a lot of the neighbors right around him. They all turned their lights on, and this kind of scared the person away, and the man then ran away. But luckily he was able to survive. He sustained horrific injuries, but he is alive. But incredibly, while this man was bleeding almost to death, he noticed that the suspect then ran into a silver vehicle, and the man, while lying on his side, looked at the registration number of this vehicle, and even though he was in and out of consciousness, when he woke up in the hospital, he was able to give the exact registration number to the police. And when the task team heard about this information, they immediately jumped into it and they looked up this case, and they then got the registration number. And this car was then registered to a Mrs. Letlaka, who apparently lived in Sandpiper Street in Yellow Park in Durban. And then on the 28th of March, the entire task team with 20 other armed officers then approached the house belonging to Mrs. Letlaka. The task team split up, and most of them went to the front of the house, but also some of them went to the back of the house. And while some of the people were at the back of the house, they noticed that there was this massive muscular man looking down at them, and he just stared at them, and then he eventually walked to the front door. Police then said that when this man came out of the house and he walked towards the front door, they said that he was so big that he had to duck under the threshold of the door, but also that when they tried to put handcuffs on him, the normal handcuffs that fit, I think, most of the population, were way too small for this guy, and they actually had to go and get leg irons instead to be able to put them around his wrists. The man that they arrested was identified as Phindile Ntshongwana. The police then asked Mrs. Letlaka if they could then have a look through the house and see if they could find any evidence. And Mrs. Letlaka said, of course, I have nothing to hide. So the police then treated everything like a crime scene, and they made sure that they had a look at everything. And when they were busy looking through the house, they didn't find the silver vehicle that everyone kept describing. However, when they were walking through the house, they did notice this massive stench of rotting meat. And when they looked around the house, they couldn't find it. But when they went outside, they noticed that in a dog kennel, there was clothing and meat inside. So in the dog kennel, they found blood-stained clothing, an axe with a yellow handle, and what looked like meat. They also found red, black, and silver Nike tackies, and the red set of tackies had the toe caps missing. And Mrs. Letlaka, who was later asked about the dog kennel, she said that they didn't have any pets there since 2 years earlier, so it was no way that an animal brought in any of these pieces of clothing or the meat. When police then asked Mrs. Letlaka also about the car, she said that apparently Phindile had gotten into a massive accident, and that silver vehicle was actually at an insurance company getting fixed, but they had given him a courtesy vehicle, which was also silver. The police then asked, okay, do you have the courtesy vehicle anywhere near you? And she said no. Apparently Phindile also returned that vehicle because it was so badly damaged as well. And apparently later on, when the cops would actually look into the insurance vehicle, they actually said that the insurance company was holding on to this car and it hadn't been touched because the car was so badly damaged. They actually wanted to take it for further investigation because you can't bring a car back that was in worse condition from a courtesy car company. So police were like, that's fantastic, let's hold on to that vehicle and take it for forensic testing later. So that's about the vehicle. So if we go back to the house and look at the dog kennel and everything that was in there, the police then brought in canines that were specifically trained to look for blood and semen. And the dogs were looking around the house. They found absolutely nothing, obviously except with the kennel. But when they went into the house, only one dog indicated at Phindile's bathroom that there was blood or semen present. So a forensic team was brought in to test and see if there was any blood found in the bathroom and to also search for human blood specifically. So when the forensic team were busy testing the bathroom, they found blood stains on the tiles in front of the shower, the wall tiles, the wash basin, and the floor mat in the bathroom. When the forensic team then took samples from all of these different areas, which lit up with the blood examinations, they then found that the blood actually belonged to an unidentified female and an unidentified male. So besides all of that, let's talk about Phindile Ntshongwana. Phindile lived with his mom in the house that he was arrested at since 2005. He went to Settlers Agricultural High School in Limpopo. He finished school in 1997 and went to Tshwane University until 2001, where he studied sports management. Phindile also played for the South African Barbarians rugby team, and he was also one of the first black players to ever be signed for the Blue Bulls, and this was in 1998. So Phindile was very intelligent and he was also an incredible sportsman. And remember, one of the victims who Phindile was attacking, he shouted at the man for apparently sleeping with his daughter and then giving his daughter HIV and AIDS. Well, Phindile never ever had a daughter. He only ever had a son, and his son was 5 years old at the time that Phindile was arrested. But Mrs. Letleka, who was Phindile's mom, actually said that Phindile really struggled with his mental health. And once police actually started digging further into Phindile's medical records and who he really was, they did notice that he was diagnosed at a psychiatric hospital, and he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and bipolar type. And apparently when someone is diagnosed with this disorder, they show signs of schizophrenia and also mood swings, mood changes, and mood disorders. And Phindile's mom did say that he never took his medication. Now remember, when I started talking about this case, I said that there were going to be 4 murders, 2 attempted murders, and 1 kidnapping. And we will get into all of that. But first, on the 1st of April 2011, so 3 days after Phindile was first arrested, a man was actually walking his dogs near a railway road when his dog kept pulling him towards the fence, which was right near the railway tracks. Near the train tracks, around 500 meters away from Phindile's house, was a man who was lying decapitated on the ground. When police were called to investigate this murder scene, they actually found the missing toe cap to one of the shoes that was found in the dog's kennel at Phindile's house. And also police were quite stumped by this murder because obviously they couldn't link it to Phindile yet. However, they thought that this case was kind of strange because yes, he had been decapitated, but he was also found naked from the waist down. And they thought that maybe this may have been a sexual motive to this case, but it was definitely different to the first couple of cases. Sadly, by the time that they actually found this body, the man was too far into the decomposition process, so they couldn't prove whether or not he had been sexually assaulted. And now back to the kidnapping. So this all took place on Sunday the 28th of November 2010. The victim was a 28-year-old female who was currently visiting her sister in Durban, and she left her sister's house and she said that she would just get a car ride or something, or she'll just walk back home. So the 28-year-old female then left the home and she started walking back to her house. Phindile then happened to drive past and he then offered this lady a lift. She first said, "No, thank you, I don't want the lift," but then apparently was quite charming and he said, "Of course, don't worry, you'll be safe, I will give you the lift." So she eventually relented and got into Phindile's car. But sadly for this lady, she felt quite comfortable in the beginning because Phindile was driving to her house or the area where her house was. But when she asked him to drop her off at the specific spot, he just drove past and she knew then that she was in trouble. She said then that Phindile then asked her if she had ever slept with a Xhosa boy, and then the lady responded no, she never has. And then Phindile looked at her and said, "Well, tonight you're going to feel how it feels." Phindile then drove to the house that he shared with his mom, and he then parked the car, put it in the garage, and pulled this lady by her arm, quickly ushering her into his room, where he then locked the room and told her to shut up and keep quiet. He then told her to take all of her clothes off, where he then raped her, and he would then keep her in his room for the next 3 days, continuously raping her and hurting her. Then, on the third day, which was the 1st of December 2010, she then said to Phindile, "Please, can I go home? I just need some more clothes. I will gladly come back. I just need to go home, get some fresh clothes, and to basically clean up." Phindile eventually relented and he said, "Okay, fine. I will take you to your home, but first I need the toilet." So he actually left her alone in the room, and as soon as he closed the door, this lady then got up. She searched through all of his stuff and she managed to find his ID as well as a receipt, because they had happened to order pizza. Well, he ordered pizza for her, and on this receipt was their address. So she took his ID and the receipt with his address and shoved it into her clothing. And when Phindile then came back, he then forced her back into the car quite harshly, and then they drove to this lady's flat. At first, Phindile then parked on the side of the road near the flat, and he told her to then go up. So this lady happily just walked herself into the flat complex kind of thing, and she then quickly ran up to her room. But before she got to her flat, she then noticed a friend of hers coming down the stairs. So the lady then quickly pulled her friend in closer. She started crying and she said, "Listen, there's this man who's downstairs and he's done this and this to me for so many days." The friend then was absolutely shocked, and she then called the security guard downstairs and said to the security guard, "Do not let that man in. He's violent and we are going to call the police." So luckily that's how this lady managed to escape, because if she hadn't met her friend and she hadn't been able to convince Phindile to let her go to her flat, who knows what else would have happened to her. So police then arrived at this lady's flat and they took a lot of DNA samples of under her nails, they took her clothes, and they also then took her to the hospital, where she was then given swabs in her genital area as well. And the DNA that later came back would positively match Phindile. Now remember, Phindile has been arrested and all of this information has previously come out, but because of Pindile's mental health, he had gone for analysis before trial to see if he was fit to stand trial, and this all happened in July 2011 after he was arrested. And then on the 12th of November 2012 did his trial actually start, because he was now fit to stand trial. And as part of the trial, they had to show a police lineup, and Phindile was put into this lineup, but because Phindile was so big and so muscular, they actually struggled to find any criminals or anyone who actually looked like Phindile. So they actually used a lot of police officers who were also big and bulky and muscular and put them in blue overalls just like Phindile, and then they lined them up as well. And apparently when each different witness who came forward pointed out Phindile almost instantly, apparently he would faint and then go into seizures. But when doctors examined him, he never had prior notice of any seizures, and he didn't afterwards. It only happened when he was in the photo lineup situation. So with the physical evidence that they had against Phindile, they had the DNA swab from the victim that he had kidnapped. They also had the DNA back from the car, and when the DNA came back from the vehicle, it had blood DNA that matched Paulus Longwa and blood that matched Simon Ngidi. And remember, they also had the evidence from the dog kennel. But when Phindile was asked to plead, he pled not guilty. But then while this entire case was happening in 2012 and early 2013, the judge who was actually presiding over this case got quite ill, and then the trial was postponed to the 15th of April 2013. And this trial really dragged on, and the defense of Phindile was incredibly harsh, and they really criticized everything that the prosecution was bringing forward. They also sadly victim blamed the kidnapping case, saying that she should have tried to break away further and she shouldn't have let this happen in the first place. Why was she walking out late at night? And we definitely don't stand for victim blaming in these situations. But judgment on this case took place between the 23rd to the 26th of September 2014. The sentencing then occurred on the 19th of December 2014.
I accordingly find that the accused has the necessary criminal capacity when committing the various offences in counts 1 to 9.
The defense said Ntshongwana suffered from amnesia, but the court said evidence proved that his conduct during all the attacks was rational. It said wiping off blood from his bathroom floor and hiding the weapon showed that he was fully conscious.
The accused has only now been convicted. Of the 9 counts, 5 of those counts carry the prescribed sentence as imprisonment for life.
And Phindile was then sentenced to 5 life sentences, plus an additional 14 years. So we know and hope that Phindile will now spend the rest of his living, breathing life behind bars. But I do have to question a couple of things. With regards to the lady that had been kidnapped, the 28-year-old female, remember when she had left Phindile's house, she grabbed his ID and his address and she gave this to the police. But they held on to this for so long. And when reading up more about this, apparently police did go and knock on the door of Phindile's mom's house, but apparently Phindile's mom just said that he wasn't here, and then when they came again, she said that he had a rugby injury so they can't come in, and then they just kind of left it. And also with the man who, remember, was attacked in the park, who gave the registration number of Phindile's car to the police, they also did nothing with that. So with this case, the police worked really quickly and really well. However, some other police just didn't bother working at all, and possibly people could have been saved if the police had just worked quicker in other circumstances. But that is the case of the Brighton Beach Axe Murderer. Let me know what you think down below. I do just want to say that one of my subscribers did mention to me that there is actually another YouTuber, a South African YouTuber, named Tshego Paledi, who has also apparently read the book of the Profiler Diaries. So she has also covered some cases from here. If you want to go check out her channel, I'll link it down below. So just give her a watch, go support and subscribe. But that is enough from me today. I can't even get my words out anymore. I hope that you all have a safe and lovely festive period now. Please stay safe out there, and I hope that everyone has a good and little bit of rest over this festive period and New Year. Thank you very much for all your support and love over this year. It has been amazing. You're all incredibly kind and incredibly supportive, and I couldn't have asked for anyone better. So thank you again very much. But I'm going to keep quiet now. This video is long enough. Have a good Christmas, have a safe New Year, and I will see you again next week. Bye.